All right. Now we're lucky enough to have the voter's guide to alternative vote counting reform proposal, and that's the voter's guide to the entire universe as we know it in voting in America. And of course, from my home state, Jan BenDor, founding member, Michigan Election Reform Alliance, Donald.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for staying here because I've come to ask for your help. The voter's guide is a work in progress, and it's kind of an urgent work. I come to you from the state of Michigan, where for the last 2 years we have been busting our butts for reforms, and I'm very happy to say that in 2018 we won. We reformed redistricting by a 61% vote, and in 2022 our districts will be determined, as in California, by an independent citizen redistricting commission. And we passed another constitutional amendment that completely opens up access to voting. We have election day registration, we have universal registration, we have universal absentee voting, and we have mandatory post-election audits. And that was a 63% win. And on top of all of that, we got a new Secretary of State, and Jocelyn Benson, who adopted my organization's platform for the state to have secure elections, and she ran on it. Now why am I talking about alternative vote counting? You know, fools rush in where angels fear to tread. And this is actually a tough area. What got me into it was the policy committee of our coalition continued. We said, hey, we've got 5,000 people on the ground, we've got an infrastructure, why are we stopping now? What else can we work on? And I was a bit upset at some of the proposals that came through. So I decided, you know, we really need to research some of this much better. So that is what I've been doing. Nancy Price, who's the co-chair of the Alliance for Democracy, said, why don't we write a voter's guide? She's always the educator. So we started to do that. And let me see how we got. Right. So you heard some of the anger in that short video that Jim showed us, the anger that people have about the two-party system. Now, my organization is nonpartisan. We're also kind of multi-partisan. We have people on our board from all the minor parties. And we try to make sure that everybody has access to the ballot. And we don't want to have things like spoilers. We are upset when there are stalking horses. That's a tactic where you run somebody who's got a name similar to somebody else, and then you knock out the incumbent that way. We've got a problem of not very diverse choices. You can primary somebody as a weapon. That's really dirty. And there's a lot of extremism right now. So how do we level the playing field and get rid of these problems? Well, there have been a lot of people trying to do that in different ways, and they have been somewhat successful at the local level primarily. Right now, there's a proposal that's being circulated for signatures in Massachusetts. They need 80,000 signatures for this proposal as an initiative of legislation to go to their legislature that would mandate preferential voting as a solution. Maine has enacted the same thing for some state races. Many cities, including San Francisco, Oakland, have done this. Ann Arbor, Michigan tried it in 1975, but they only had hand counting and it took them almost a month. And they didn't do that anymore. Now, most recently, we have a bill in Congress, 4464, that would mandate the use of ranked choice voting in presidential voting. So Why am I concerned about all this? Well, this kind of reform is taken on the nature of a fad. If you want to be a good progressive, you're going to knee-jerk want to do this one thing. Instead of looking around at, is this really the best way to solve all these problems we're worried about? We've had solutions promoted without a major debate, like at the Unrigged conference, there was no debate, it was just one side. And I'm concerned that some of these reforms might be easy vectors for election fraud, and you'll see why. The other problem is we've got a lot of election reform priorities. People here have been laying them out, right? And I'm finding that people who are activists for vote counting reform are generally unaware or not very concerned about all the basic vulnerabilities that we have. So they just want to do this one thing without realizing, hey, we don't have election security, we don't have accuracy, we don't have verifiability. A lot of them think an audit is just a spot check, what's the big deal? And they don't know about paperless DREs and so forth, the chain of custody problem. So what people have been focusing on for the solution is primarily two groups of vote counting reforms. We're trying to replace plurality voting. We know it very well with all of its flaws. We have ranked choice in IRB, which a lot of people know about because it's been heavily promoted. What a lot of people don't know about are the range voting solutions. And there's one called approval voting. What is that? Well, you've got 4 candidates with a single winner. You can vote for all 4 of them, 3 of them, 2 of them, 1 of them, or none of them. And it's very simple. So I have a 5-minute video here, and I beg your indulgence in this. But it is way better than showing you mathematical formulas. I quit after Calc 2 because my Calc teacher would endlessly work at the chalkboard with a cigarette hanging from his mouth. And we were always worried that he was going to try to smoke the chalk and write with a cigarette. So that's not something I really want to do. So I'm going to just get this fired up. And, well, that didn't work. I should have done that differently, shouldn't I?
Just back up and click on it again.
Okay, let's see. All right, that might be better. And there's an organization called the Center for Election Science, which has been working on the problems that
I think you gotta click on it.
I am now needing to see how I can expand this video.
Oh,
And it's not showing up.
oh,
Okay, thank you. We just want to see this.
you might have to escape from the PowerPoint and go
We're
down.
out. Yeah, we're outside of the car.
Of course, this works seamlessly when we try to.
Yeah,
Murphy's Law.
how about unplugging the plug and then plugging it in?
But this is a very well illustrated demonstration of something that you may never have heard of, which is called the failure of monotonicity. And
It went right back to the PowerPoint.
monotonicity is a concept from both mathematics and economics. And people have borrowed that term for the theory of social choice and what happens to social decision making if you don't follow the rule. many people here have heard of Kenneth Arrow? Yay.
Is this an
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
what is
So Kenneth Arrow co-won a Nobel Prize for his work in economics. And he was actually the father of social choice theory, which is kind of behind all of what we're working on, is how do we vote, how do we make decisions? Don't I want to get rid of this?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Instant runoff voting.
Yeah.
May the best candidate win. Over the next few minutes, we will investigate how instant runoff voting often overlooks the best candidate as described by the voters, but is deemed a successful election because no voting machines exploded or burst into flames, there were no paper cuts, and in the end, someone was elected, usually by less than a majority, and it doesn't even have to be instant. In fact, in Minneapolis, they warned that it may take up to 8 weeks to decide on who the winner was. So how does one determine whether an election was a success? Political scientists typically look at whether it reflected the will of the people. In a traditional election, one person, one vote, that's pretty easy to do. You just count the votes up, 1, 2, 3. The person with the most votes wins. They have the most support of the people. But in an instant runoff voting election, that's a little more difficult with the vote shuffling and recounting. It doesn't always match with the voters' intent. So political scientists and universities now have begun to study instant runoff voting and ranked choice voting. And that's just what the folks over at University of Vermont's Legislative Research Shop has done. They've taken a look at the recent Burlington, Vermont's election for mayor and analyzed it against typical election criteria. What they found was surprising. They've published several papers on the election describing the problems, and most recently published an assessment on instant runoff voting. Links will be provided at the end. Why the renewed interest in Burlington? Well, because now there's a petition drive to get rid of instant runoff voting. Another case of buyer's remorse after experiencing instant runoff voting a couple of times. Now let's take a look at one of the problems experienced in the election. One of the ways to determine if a ranking method is democratic is if the winner reflects the will of the people and selects the candidate with the most support. You can determine this with the head-to-head competitions based upon their ranking. Here we have a spreadsheet of the recent Burlington, Vermont mayor's election. We have eliminated the minor candidates and their votes did not affect the outcome. You can see in each case, some voters just voted for their favorite candidate and no one else. Can you tell who wins just by looking at it? Okay, let's run the instant runoff counting scheme. People are eliminated, votes are moved around, recounted, some votes thrown away. Okay, enough of the suspense. Kiss was elected with 48% support. Putting it another way, 52% of the voters rejected him that day. Ranked choice voting typically acts like a plurality based upon the turnout when selecting its winners. Let's start looking at the head-to-head information contained within these votes. Here we have Kiss battling Right. The rankings show us 4,314 voters want Kiss to win over Right, and 4,064 prefer Right to Kiss. So 51.5% of the voters wanted Kiss to win over 48.5% to Right. Okay, let's look at the matchup between Montrell and Right. 4,597 wanted Montrell to win versus Right, and 3,668 wanted Right to win over Montrell. That's 55.6% of the voters wanting Montrell to win versus Right. That's a huge majority. Now onward to a matchup between Kiss and Montrell. Remember, Kiss won using instant runoff voting, and he was preferred to win over Right, and Montrell was preferred in a head-to-head over Right. Let's see what the voters have to say with this matchup. 4,067 voters preferred Montrell to win over Kiss. But let's see how the support is for Kiss in this matchup. We have only 3,477 voters favor Kiss to win over Montrell. Montrell is favored by over 8% to win in a head-to-head matchup with KISS. That's quite a margin. So what does this all mean? Because of recent sunshine laws, researchers are able to access the ballot results, analyze them, and see if voters' choice align with the instant runoff voting results. We found that KISS would have won against Wright in a head-to-head battle, and Montrell would have won against Wright in a head-to-head race. And Montrell would have won against KISS by a large margin. Montrell, without question, would have beat all the candidates in a head-to-head race and had the majority of support of all the voters.
But it wasn't that kind
So let's take a look at how the instant runoff voting scheme of vote shuffling and recounting treated the candidate who would have beat them all in a head-to-head battle. As you already knew, KISS came in first place with the instant runoff voting. But what about the other results? Wright came in second place, and Montrell came in dead last. Surprising, isn't it? The candidate that was shown to beat all others in a head-to-head battle came in last place. Had this been a traditional election, political scientists agree voters would have voted differently than in a ranked choice voting or instant runoff election as seen here. Many voters who voted for Wright first, a Republican, and Montrell second, would have voted for Montrell, knowing that a Republican hasn't won for mayor in decades. In this case, it shows that the spoiler effect can happen with instant runoff voting.
Well, you can access a number of other interesting videos at this same site, and we'll definitely want to move on. But this is a demonstration of the erratic nature of preferential voting. And there have been several doctoral theses and 2 books that have been written estimating that in any set of elections held, any number of races rather, fully 1/5 of them will suffer from this erratic result. Not the result that voters were expecting and excited about in hopes that their third-party candidate would win. So I've included here, but I'm not going to draw on some proofs that you can do for yourself if you're inclined to work with this problem. We'll let that happen for those who wish to do it when we have our guide out. But monotonicity in elections is an important concept, and that is voters' preferences are strongly monotonic. If given a vote selection bundle of choices, the voter prefers all the selections that have more of at least one good and not less than any other good. So it's kind of a complicated concept, but it does predict some of these problems when we don't have monotonicity honored in the system we're using. In addition, there are other challenges that we need to anticipate with some of these systems. Now, approval voting, I might add, does not have the failure of monotonicity that we just saw. Nobody has been able to define it in any of the, but it hasn't been used as much. So you have Fargo, North Dakota just decided that's what they're going to use for their city elections, and we'll find out soon how that works out for them. But most election counting reforms are adopted with no plan as to how they're going to conduct risk-limiting audits. So these audits would be very complex, of course, because at each stage of an iterative process, you'd have to do an audit. So you could be doing 4 audits for one election. Phil Stark says there are ballot polling and ballot level RLAs for IRB, but has anybody done this? I have not discovered a single example. As Luther Weeks said, and I agree with him, we spend all this money on new airplanes, do we really need to retrain the pilots? Yeah, I think we do. Luther's an activist in Connecticut, by the way. There's also technical and security challenges, and this is where I believe that we're not going to want to introduce any new vectors for fraud. So right now we have no ballot scan tabulators that are equipped to fully process all the alternative vote counting systems. I talked with Hardinger Civic, whose IT director has been very friendly to me, and I hope he's not telling stories like some of the other guys. And he admits that they can't handle it. They have a utility that will export the cast vote records for further processing, but that's it. So it'll have to be taken by someone else. That presents some other problems. So when I talked with the activists in Maine who are concerned about their lack of verifiability and so forth, it said to me, they told me that they have to transport 250 flash drives to Augusta's central computer in order to finish counting an RCV election. Now, that's not very many flash drives. You could probably get those in one police car. But what about larger states? You could have 10,000 flash drives. Police escorts are very expensive, by the way. Maine's even going to drop them and use private couriers, which worries me. They're not sworn officials. So what's the potential cost of all this moving things around and losing things, as we know? That's inevitable. Then we've got legal problems with some of the alternative systems. My state and other states, some other states require that all election hardware and software be certified by a state certification system, which California has, and by the National Election Assistance Commission or the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. I contacted both of these organizations to find out if they have in fact certified any software for the handling of iterative preferential vote counting systems or approval voting, and they've done nothing. There's nothing out there that they can tell me about. That did not stop the September 5th issue of Ranked Choice Voting News from saying, oh, we now have our software, the RCV tabulator, has been officially federally certified. Please document, or give me a footnote on that or something. So I think it's not true. There are going to be legal challenges in Maine if they continue. Their constitution, their state constitution requires plurality voting in the general election phase of their statewide officers. So for their governor, and they just decided to postpone trying to do a presidential election that way until 2024, which is probably a good idea. Voter usability is another messy area. Dana Chisnell was a researcher at NIST, and she did a workshop on 2009 on all of the usability problems with some of these systems. And my own county clerk said, how are you going to do a preferential vote cast when you've got a bedsheet ballot with, you could have up to 100 races that were multi-candidate, single winner. How are they going to do that? It'll take that poor person hours. We have the EAC's own voluntary voting system guidelines, 2.0, that was approved last month. And they require that, in the case of ranked choice voting, systems implementing this must report the contest option vote totals for each ranked choice contest for each round of tabulation. Haven't seen that done either. So presumably that's a standard that really would apply from top to bottom in all of our elections. Then we've got, last but not least, political challenges, where we've got two major political parties who have power now. They're not going to give it up willingly, much as they know they're not terribly popular with a lot of people for the way they operate. And particularly in my state, I cannot imagine how either of the major parties is going to support a reform that might help third parties win. So the one reason they might support it is if it eliminates the spoiler effect. So although Democrats loved Ross Perot, remember, but they didn't like Ralph Nader. So there will be voter-initiated proposals or constitutional amendments, but these are going to be fought with a huge amount of outside dark money, as we have found out in our Michigan redistricting reform. We've been fighting Koch brothers money and every other retrenchment, and we're not done yet. We're still defending our reform. So I urge everyone to get the word out that, you know, these things are not what they might seem. Please don't jump on a fad bandwagon. You can be a good progressive and support other kinds of alternatives. Look before you lead. And Nancy Price and I are going to continue to work on this voter's guide, and we would love to have your feedback about what else people need to know to make good decisions. Thank you very much.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. My recollection of the math from when I was doing my doctoral work with the Dean's Association of Election Systems and Define was that it is almost impossible in a single-member district to deal with, error and conversation kinds of problems. You're always ending up, not always, but obviously it's very possible to end up with issues of interpretation of choice. And in any event, you're always ending up, unless you have a really good demographic distribution, you always end up with a situation where the majority gets the only seats at the table, or gets most of the seats at the table. And so the basic one of the fundamental precepts of democracy is that minorities get a seat at the table, at least talk about things, and at least get to moderate the policy proposals in the majority. And with a single-member district system, with sufficiently biased demographics, you lose that altogether. So now in Michigan, since you're going back to some of the fundamentals, why not start talking about, just to initiate the conversation, talk about multi-member districts, that they're not perfect, but they're the least imperfect system, that the math suggests, is good for democracy, because it gives a lot more people a seat at the table. It takes away the spoiler effect altogether. Gerrymandering almost disappears as a practical matter. The single-member district simply is a sacred cow that nobody can approach.
Well, at least in our state, we'd have to, again, amend the state constitution. But that is the cousin of alternative vote counting. And these are things that people need to be discussing and really looking at, as opposed to jumping on bandwagons. And I knew there was something up when I called Fair Vote, which is one of the big cheering spots for RCB, and I started asking them questions about the technology and the software, and there was a person at the other end of the phone who screamed at me. And I had already said I'm from a nonpartisan organization, I don't represent the big two, so that's not an attitude that's going to get us to where we need to go.
So it's interesting that you mentioned Fair Vote and Ranked Choice Voting. Ranked Choice Voting Center, Resource Center, Gary Bartlett is on their board. Gary Bartlett is our two previous elections directors, executive director of the State Board of Elections. He personally helped Governor Cooper handpick our current executive director and our current chair, who both love ballot marking devices. And none of it makes sense, and I kind of suspected, based on that they were both part of this ranked choice, and the executive director used to be on the board as well. And so, I almost wondered, is Fair Vote being funded by the vendors? And I know that Maine, they do hand mark paper ballots, so is there any advantage to using ballot marking devices? I'm just trying to kind of just figure out how this puzzle ties together.
Well, 2 years ago, we had a gentleman at this conference who spoke ardently about ranked choice. He was from Massachusetts, and clearly they've been moving forward on their proposal. And people said, how is your proposal not going to marry us even more deeply into black box voting? How else can we do this? If the city of Ann Arbor took almost a month to count their city council election in 1975, and then it ended up with the mayor had a 1 vote margin. Thank God there were no recounts requested. How do you propose that we not fall into the vendor's hands? And there was not an answer to that. And I really think that it puts us there right away.